All right, welcome to the Romera Records podcast, and today we have on Sage Bender, right?
Yeah.
All right, Sage Bender. You are a 32-time world champion. You can go ahead and I guess just tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Whatever martial arts you've been into. I guess how you started. Let's go with how you started first.
Right. I'm Sage Bender. I'm a Memphis original, and when I was younger, I'm half Japanese, so my mom grew up in Tokyo, so martial arts was a big thing for her. So I was like maybe 5-6 years old, and she's like, man, I want to put you in Taekwondo. And I was like, oh, sweet, I get to kick, I get to do all this crazy kid stuff. And like 9-10 years old, I'd been doing it for about 3 years consecutively, and she was like, man, this is a joke, we need to put you in a real sport. And she found out about this guy named Joel Gingrey, and he was a former Navy SEAL, and he had this great Jiu-Jitsu program out in Memphis. And so she was like, man, we're going to try this out. So I'm like 9 years old, and I jump into it, and man, I hated it. It sucked. It's a brutal reality because Jiu-Jitsu, it's called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's a mix of like judo, wrestling, and submission grappling. So you're working to take them to the ground, pin them, and submit them. And as a 9-year-old kid, most of these kids been doing it for a couple years, and just a little bit of Jiu-Jitsu can just like terrorize anybody that doesn't know how to fight. And so as a kid, and I had an ego as a little kid, so I was like, man, I don't like this. And so did it for a couple years, and then I was like, Mom, I really want to get out of this. I really want to quit. And she's like, oh, no, you're not going anywhere. You're going to stick with this. And so, I stuck with it, and, I had these kids that would always beat me consecutively, and I started working on it. I started getting more devoted. I started doing private lessons, and then I started improving. I started, making an edge on these kids to the point where I could beat them, and then I saw like what was possible when you start to really try, and that was my beginning of like understanding that hard work equals, results. And that was, a really young age. And so it was like a wake up call. And, Jiu-Jitsu is a discipline thing. You show up there almost every day, at least every day during the week. And my mom, man, she was my PowerPoint. She'd drive me there every single day, watch me in class, go home and just critique me, and so, I did that every single day. I started competing around 12, 13, and she'd drive me everywhere, Nashville, Atlanta, all the local tournaments. And, my first big tournament was Kids Pan Am. So it's Pan Americans. It's a really big competition for kids. And,
So what is Pan American?
So Jiu-Jitsu has like 4 or 5 major tournaments a year. It's Worlds, which is your world championships. And that's the biggest deal to Jiu-Jitsu, because you have to have like certain points to qualify to even compete, and you get points by competing in competitions. And then you have Pan Americans or Pan Ams. It's all these go down in California, and it's basically kind of like Worlds, but it's a little smaller scale, but it's still one of the major Jiu-Jitsu titles you can hold. And then after that is you have the equivalent of Nogi Pan Ams. That goes down in New York City. And then you have Nogi Worlds, which is so gi. Nogi is just like you have like a rash guard and shorts, and you're grappling. It's more like a wrestling submission grappling type, whereas the gi is you have that kimono, you see, and you do a lot of like, it's a lot more controlling, and you see a lot more incorporation of like judo and just control, because you have these lapels and you can just grip them and like pin someone down really hard. So you have those competitions. So then in the same way, they don't have as many opportunities for kids, but they had Kids Pan Ams. So my mom was like, man, let's go out to California, and so I went out there, and I got crushed. I did really great the first round. I remember this kid from Great Britain. He came in, and I just went at it, and I was going ham, and I beat him in the end. Like, it was a really close match. Like, got the advantage. You can win by points or a submission. You tap them out. And so it was like a tie score, and I was holding on to a submission the entire time, and then like I got up in the end, the timer went off, and then he gave me an advantage, and I won the match, and I felt like a superhero, and then the next round, I fought hard, but I couldn't do it, so I placed bronze. And so third place wasn't what I wanted, but it was my first experience in the big kid rodeo.
Still really good,
right? And, you know, there's not a lot of people from Memphis that, you know, do the jiu-jitsu scene. And so a good friend of mine, Gabe Geyser, you know, he grew up training with me at the same time, and he was our first, like, kids Pan Am gold medalist. You know, he was the star of the show. And so, you know, he was like an inspiration to help me out there. And then, you know, I started competing more and more, you know, 14, 15 hit around. I started to really hit my wave, and then people started to recognize potential. So I started training more and more. And then this is the point where my mom was like, okay, this is a little too much, because I'm still Asian, so there's still school, you know, I wanted to be in
I was about to ask you about
right.
that. I was like, where does school come in?
And, you know, I would be traveling almost every weekend, and, you know, my friends, I was homeschooled, you know, all my life, and I have two older sisters, and my mom always gave us opportunity to be homeschooled so we could do whatever we wanted.
Okay.
You know, and so I was like, man, you know, jiu-jitsu is going to be my lingo. And so I was doing it more and more, and, you know, it started to create friction between me and my mom, because she's like, you have to do this school. And, you know, I'd basically BS answers in school and just use Google, and, you know, the positives and negatives of homeschooling, you know, and I was just doing anything to get in that gym.
Yeah.
And, you know, Joel Gingery, man, he took me in, he started working with me, and we do private lessons like every single week. And he was like fine tuning details. His big thing was like, you know, do 10,000 repetitions and you can begin to create patterns. And so, you know, it would be these basic fundamentals. You know, fundamentals is the most important thing to jiu-jitsu. The sport's evolving now, so there's a lot of high tech, you know, high-end competitors, grapplers, and it's really breaking into the submission sport rectum. But the thing is that when it was back then, it was really fundamentally orientated. And if you don't have your fundamentals down, you're not going to get anywhere. And so, you know, I had an advantage to start at a young age, and Joel just made the fundamentals my foundation. And so when I became like 16, 17, I had a very like athletically blessed body. You know, some people, their body shapes just naturally work better in jiu-jitsu. You know, you have the heavyweights and you have the lightweights, and lightweights are usually more active, and you do a lot of like inverted games, so you go underneath people a lot, and you can like fit your bodies into weird little positions and just use Kazushi. You know, you're using body disbalance, you're using their weight, and it's just pushing them right into the next move. And so I started to develop my own game. I did stuff called barambolos, you know, like high tech, you know, very detail orientated moves. And it's not a game that's very like widely known to a lot of people, because it takes a lot of like skill to kind of warrant what you're doing. And so then I started developing my own game. I took Joel's fundamentals, and then I started developing my own, you know, how I wanted to fight. And then, you know, 16 years old, Joel told me, hey, you know, I'm going to No-Gi Worlds. Do you want to come? And, you know, it's by far the biggest competition I've ever done. And, you know, I was like, I don't feel that I'm ready, but I want to give it. I want to give it my all, you know. And so
that's a leap.
I was like, all right, let's do this. You know, 16 years old, I think I can do this. And, you know, I go out there, and, you know, we fly out there, and I was with Joel and, you know, a couple of my teammates, and we were just, you know, just taking it by flow, had to cut some weight. And, you know,
what are you competing at?
As a weight class, we go different weight classes. I usually compete like 145 to 155 around there, and each, like with no-gi and gi, there's like different weight classes, so it'd be like light or light feather.
What do you walk around as?
Normally I walk around like 145, and then,
so it's not that bad.
Yeah, and so normally you want to be at like the top of your weight class. So like when I was 16, they do something called the juvenile bracket, which is like a teens only division. You're still worlds, you're still, you know, competing at the world level, but it's just you get to fight against teens, which actually sucks worse. Because teens are more active, they just naturally, they're more gifted, and they have the ability to just process things faster. They don't have as much responsibility, you know, you don't have a job you have to do most of the time. These parents pay for everything. So it's actually harder to fight kids. I would much rather fight an adult, you know, who I know isn't training as much, you know. And so it's easy, you know. And so I was like, man, you know, I got this tough bracket. And I looked at the weight class because I was 145. So I said, well, I can do this 130 to 145 division because, you know, I have 145. If you can be at the top of your weight class, you're usually at the best advantage. So, you know, I registered, and then I realized there was nobody in my bracket. And so I was like, dang, I got to move up. And so it was like and I had already started like going down in weight, so I think I was sitting at like 140, and then I like, you get pre-competition jitters, man. It's bad, and you know, you just like the second when you walk into jiu-jitsu venues and it's like roaring, you know, there's a lot of Brazilians in the sport, man, and nobody likes to get more hype than like Portuguese. And, you know, they just, you know, they're going in and you just hear it and then everything just stops. And, you know, you get this feeling in your stomach. And so, you know, when you compete, you look at your competitors in your bracket and you have to look them up. You have to know their game. You have to study them. I know my opponent before I step on the mat. Oh, and wow. It's a very tactical thing. So, you know, I would get nervous. And so I started not to eat as much before I competed. And, you know, I was just like really, really focused on just training. And so by the time I actually weighed into the venue, I weighed like 133, I think. And so like my weight just dropped. And so there was like a 17-pound difference between me and the next kid. That was the closest kid to my division. So like mentally it just started to like play with me. And, you know, as a SEAL, Joel was, you know, he's like, hey, you know, you need to get your mental game in check. You know, envision you're on top of that podium and just imagine your hand being raised and just over and over and over. And so, you know, I was like, all right, I'll try it. And so, you know, I go out there and my first match was a battle, and, you know, I came out with the victory in the end, and then I went into my second match, and then, you know, I won that one as well. And then, you know, just like that, it was, you know, I was a world champion. And, you know, like I stood up and I submitted him. I think my finals match was like 17 seconds left, and I stood up and I was like, wow. Like I'm a world champion. Like, what do I do now? And you know, I got my hand raised, and Joel was like, you know what? I want you to go for that absolute title. And if you can place first, second, or third, you get to compete in the absolute division open weight class. And so, you know, I was like, all right, let's do it. And, you know, I went into the absolute division. I felt really good. I felt really solid. 17 seconds in, I submitted my first opponent, and, you know, I just kept going. 17 seconds. Yeah, you know, sometimes it happens, and, you know, that's fast. I just kept going, and I kept going, and bam, I won my absolute title. And it was surreal. You know, you just look down and you got these 2 gold medals, and, you know, they're beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing you ever seen in the moment. And it's like, man. And you go home, and, you know, there's not a lot of world champions in Memphis. You know, we have a select few, and like Joel, he's like a powerhouse. He won absolute and weight that year as well. Make sure this is good. And you know, it's a lot. And once you get those world titles, you get a lot of recognition. And once I started coming back, that's when I started to realize like the power of social media marketing. You know. Just putting that picture of me on the podium with a double gold, that's a lot to a jiu-jitsu athlete and to a company. And so they see that, and it's like instant recognition. And so, you know, I started marketing more. I started getting into social media marketing and what it takes, you know, started working with companies, sponsorships. And then, you know, I started getting to the point where they could help me with competitions. You know, they send you gear, they send you recognition, you know, and you know, you kind of balance with, and you use each other to kind of, you use companies and they use you to kind of balance out. You know, they send you products and you're like, hey man, you know, you reach out to your friends, you're like, hey, I got this great company, you should try their products. They'll usually give you a discount code, you know. And so I was like really excited because I was like 16, 17 years old, and, you know, that was like, I felt famous, you know. I was like, yeah. And you know, it was a great feeling. And I started training more, and then we have a lot of jiu-jitsu gyms in Memphis. Like,
actually, so I work with Marcus Williams.
Really?
Yeah, I work with him, and I told him because I found out that he did jiu-jitsu. Right, and I was like, I want to do a podcast with this kid named Sage, and he was like, I know Sage.
Yeah, Marcus is my guy, man. But yeah, we have like, I want to say like 5 or 6 gyms that are jiu-jitsu orientated. And when I left Memphis, I used to train at a place called Memphis Judo and Jiu-Jitsu. So, you know, some stuff happened, and Joel created another gym, and we train under a gym called Chilcut MMA in Memphis. And, you know, people came from all over to support, and, you know, we just started training. But because we created a new gym, it was obviously smaller numbers. So we started to, you know, have to focus. I went from having 30, 40 people in a class to maybe, 20 and then maybe 10. It all depends on the day. Some days you'll have 30 people on the mat, another day you'll have 4 or 5, And so, jiu-jitsu is a very challenging sport, but I think in a way it shaped who I was, and when, like, after the gym split, I wasn't getting quite as great of a training as I used to. So the next year, follow up, I went to Nogi Worlds. I was like, let's go for this again, 3rd and 4th title. Let me see if I can get it. And, I had my first match. I felt solid. I just lost it, and that was the end. Didn't place. So, I couldn't do the absolute. And so that was it. And, I've competed in more competitions than I can count. And I would say well over 200 tournaments. Each tournament has about 3 to 4 fights. So, that's a lot of fights. It's 700-800 fights. And, I could count how many times I lost. It's less than like 20 tournaments. And,
What?
And, well, like, the thing was that being raised as a kid, you just have an advantage. And, if you focus and if you put your mind to the game, then it just changes everything. And
so what point are you? I mean, you're 18, right?
Right.
So at 18 years old, you've gone through all these different tournaments and you become an absolute champion. What do you feel like what stage in your career do you feel like you're in? Do you feel like, because I don't know the age. I know in MMA, you got people like Anderson Silva who are fighting close to 40, and then you got people like Chuck Liddell who were up there in age.
Yeah.
And then you have John Bones Jones, who they said he was in his prime at like 22 or 23. Like, he was young, but he's still, prime, maybe. But what age do you feel like people are topping out? I know boxers, they usually top out like, I think late 20s or early 30s or something like that. Do you feel like you're still in the learning and developing stage, or are you there?
I am not there whatsoever.
Okay.
I believe that like 15 through 24 is the prime time you have to do anything in life. That is the sport of your youth, where the most opportunities, your mind, your body is just working at its highest capability. And, MMA is a little different. It's a different aspect with the striking. We call jiu-jitsu the gentle art, so there's never going to be striking or kicking. But a lot of, MMA, UFC, that's an incorporation of jiu-jitsu the second you go to the ground. And the thing with jiu-jitsu is that most people start around 19, 20.
Okay.
Like, most people start as adults. And so the people that start as teens, let alone kids, have a major advantage over these people that started later, because, man, they had the, you're 12 years old, you have endless energy. You could train 3 times a day and still, be ready to, go hang out with your friends and all that stuff. And so, I think the only thing that changes as you get older, seeing like I started at a young age and then I kept going, is that your maturity. It's easy to get real cocky, the more you fight, and especially I think a lot of athletes are really cocky in the sport. And, it's the thing that changes is you start to realize that what you want. Some people fight for themselves, it's like a one person sport, and, you have to remember that it's your team. And, I would say at 18 years old, I'm just getting started.
Okay.
I hit a,
that's scary for your competition.
Yeah, I mean, I hit I hit a big spike, 16, 17, and then like 17, 18, I hit a little plateau. A lot of jiu-jitsu athletes hit plateaus, just kind of flat lines, and you're not feeling better, but you're not really feeling like you're decreasing. You're just showing up to the gym. And then 18, hit, and, I moved out because my mom was like, man, because I wanted to do jiu-jitsu instead of college. I felt comfortable in it. I felt, ready. And so my mom was like, all right, that's fine, but you're not staying here. So I was like, all right, let me move out. And, then you have to get a job, and, it takes away from training,
Yeah.
And so it's all lessons in the end. But, I say it's just getting started, because it's it took a second. You know, I was like really close to going into the military. You know, I wanted to go into the Navy. I wanted to be a medic, and you know, I loved the medical field, and you know, it was like I really wanted to do it, but I was like, man, I promised myself I would give jiu-jitsu a chance. And you know, it was really hard because I was like, man, you know, I had the dream of going in the military since I was a little kid, but when you think about what did you actually do for each of your corresponding futures that you want to do, man, I put my life into jiu-jitsu. You know, I gave up a social life, I gave up friends, I gave up, you know, I couldn't date just because it was, you know, no girlfriend wants a guy that's in a gym, you know, all day, you know, and you just can't give them what they want, you know, guaranteed. And
especially
so,
at your age.
yeah, and so I was like, man, you know, this, I put so much work into this. I am going to see this through, and that's been my mental, you know, zone recently, and I've just been really focused on what I want. You know, me and Joel, you know, he's like a father figure to me. I spent more time with Joel on those mats than I did with my own family growing up, and you know, and so you know, me and him are just focusing, and we're like. It's just blowing up, you know, and Joel's been the inspiration because, man, that dude's been everywhere. I think he's a 9-time world champion now, you know. Last year when I lost Worlds, he won double gold, you know, he won his weight in the absolute, and, you know, he has fought some absolute legends in the sport, and, man, he just keeps going. He's like in his middle 50s, and he looks like he's 30 years old, man, and
that's what being in shape will do to you.
I know, and it's crazy, and so it's like, all right, you see what's possible, and so why not pursue it? You know, I have nothing holding me back. I have, you know, no responsibilities, and so, you know, I'm going to see jiu-jitsu through, and so 18, I say, is just taking off. I say 21 to 24 is your opportunity to hit the levels. Most of the time, promotions, like, so you have belt systems in jiu-jitsu, and every time you compete at those belt levels. So you go from white to blue to purple to brown to black.
Okay.
And then that's only if you're above 16. If you're below that, you have kids belts as well, because they can't give you a blue belt. You know, they don't want a 12-year-old fighting a 16-year-old just because he's a blue belt. Most of the time, you can get a blue belt in a year. That's most of the time. Because I started at 9, by the time, like, you can get your blue belt the year you turn 16.
Oh,
so by the time I got my blue belt, I already had like 7 years of jiu-jitsu on there, which is where that advantage comes in. You know, you fight people that maybe been only training for like 6 months or a year. And so, you know, and, you know, I'm looking like that purple belt's right in the for future. You know, I'm getting ready. You know, I'm at the end of my blue belt phase. 2 years is a long time to have a blue belt if you're actively competing, but I got kind of lazy with it, you know, so I wasn't ready for that. And so just working up, and then you have brown, black, man. Those are usually purple to brown, and brown to black are really quick belts. Purple to brown is probably the longest you'll be at a belt. And, you know, once you're 21 to 24, you hit those black belt, upper brown belt levels, and that's where competition just blows up. That's where you can tell whether you can make it in the sport or not, because some of the most brutal guys are.
But what's the most dense belt? Like, there's, you know, maybe 100 people in this and 200 people competing in that.
Right.
Like, what's the most
populated
belt?
I would say brown, because brown belt is just this like pinnacle of you've gone so far, but you're not there yet. You know, black belt is you're there, and you know, and so brown belt really, like, sometimes that competition toll just tears down. You know, I've seen brown belts that have been brown belts for like 5 years and never won a major competition. You know, it's just they're training every day, but man, the level that some of these kids, you know, they never worked a day in their life, and they started when they were 5-6 years old, you know, and they train every single day with gyms that would pay for their flights, their food, their board, and they would just send them out to every competition. Living in Tennessee, there's not a lot of competitions, but some of these kids live in California, New York City, man, the competitions are at their front door.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they just, you know, and so like when you get raised in like a local environment and a mediocre competition like team, then you're like, man, how can I ever face up to these guys? And that's where it's all heart, you know. I didn't come from the greatest gym, but, you know, hey, I'm a world champion. Look where I am now.
Yeah.
And, you know, Joel Gingrey, you know, he didn't come from a big gym, but, man, he has beat some of the greatest legends in the sport. And, you know, it's all to your heart, you know. So I say brown belt, you know, is definitely the most dense, and you know, that's where your heart really comes out, and it's like, how much are you willing to give up for the sport, you know? Because you have to make a decision. Do I want to find a life? Do I want to pursue something else? Do I want to get married, or do I want to, you know, continue with this sport and give it my all? Because you have to give it your all, honestly.
And I noticed that is definitely the difference between people who are good at something and then people who are great at something and then people who are, you know, the best. And it's that dedication level. With, you know, I do music, and I see people who are just like, you know, we can make a song together. I'm like, all right, cool, man. But it's like they aren't really dedicated to it like I am. Like, you know, I've got my job that I work 8 hours a day, and then I have schoolwork that I do, and then I do music as like, that's my last priority, you know, work first and then school and then my music. But that takes up all of my free time. If I'm not spending it with my wife Rachel, then it's music. And some people, music's like in the back burner, and it's like, man, if you really want to be great at what you do, you've got to put that at the forefront of what you're doing. And especially somebody at your age where you have the time to dedicate that kind of stuff. And people just need to understand, you know, if you dedicate or if you prioritize your time to be dedicated to what you love, then you'll end up, you know, doing what you've done at such an early age. As you said, some people start in, you know, that 19 to 24 or 21-year-old age, and you've already accomplished more than what they probably will ever do before you even reach that age.
Right. So which is like really crazy to think about, you know. It's like, but you know, blessings are blessings. So, you know, you can burn that opportunity to the ground if you're not careful. And so, you know, you in jiu-jitsu, you know, you can take whatever character you want, but you know, the most important thing is, you know, you got to stay humble, and you got to understand that it doesn't matter how big you can get, there's always somebody that's going to step on you in that end, you know. So you stay humble so that no matter what happens, you know, you always have yourself to come back to. And you know, you have to remember that, because you get these world champions, and you know, they just get an ego, and then they hit the black belt level. You know, they were so good, and they hit that black belt level, and they never win everything, and they just quit. You know, 15, 16 years in the sport, and they're like, nah, this is too much. And it shows, you know. It's like, so what were you fighting for, you know? And, you know, jiu-jitsu's changed my life. You know, it gave me utmost confidence. You know, you can walk into a room anytime, and you just know you're confident. And, you know, it creates automatic respect. You know, fighting is a respectful sport. And, you know, like, you know, a lot of people are like, so are you good at fighting? And, you know, Bruce Lee, you know, said it best. It's like, man, you know, if I say I'm bad, that'd be a lie. But if I say I'm good, that means I'm cocky, you know? And so it's like, be humble about it. But, you know, you fight to the point, and you train to the point where you don't have to speak about what you've done, because your results speak for themselves. That's the pinnacle of the mindset that I tried to go about, you know, and live my life, because that's the staple point, whether you're in jiu-jitsu or life. And, you know, that's what I want to be remembered for. That's dope. That's dope. And I think that people should definitely understand that. Know that you're good at what you do, but you don't have to tell everybody. Right. You know, this is what I do. This is what I've done. Like, yes, be good at what you do. You know, if you and teach people. You know, a lot of times people will hold back information from people just because they want to say that they, you know, that they have everything. But, you know, somebody wants to learn, you know, teach them. But, you know, you don't have to. You're not obligated to, you know, to tell everybody everything you know. Yeah. So it's interesting, you know, I guess being in that position that you are. But do you teach at the? I teach kids, and I teach beginners. I do privates. You know, I do a lot of mentorship to the kids and whatnot. You know, it's a great opportunity to pass down. So that's awesome. Yeah. All right, so it's about time to wrap up. But thank you for coming on. Yeah, man, I had a blast. Thank you for having me. Yeah. Everybody, Sage Bender, it was awesome to have him on, and hopefully we can maybe do something else in the future. I'd be stoked. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody.